Hello everyone, welcome back to Compact Redstone. This is 2-1 basic locationality and directionality, which also marks the beginning of the intermediate courses series. I'm MU222, and as the title suggested, we would be discussing locationality and directionality. And you might have also noticed that I added the word basic because I quite frankly think that the course contents in this video would not talk very deeply about locationality and directionality. It will only touch about the basics of it. So it is already very useful for your understanding if you are just starting out Redstone. But then if you want more advanced knowledge of it, you can always refer to other videos on YouTube. But here I will just explain some basic details for you. So without further ado, let's get started. And here we come to the first one, which is locationality. So the definition of locationality is that it refers to circuits that work in specific but not all locations. And for here, because we are only talking about the basic aspects of locationality, so we would learn about one of the main causes of locationality, which is actually redstone dust. So here we can see we have two setups that are basically mirrored, and they should prohibit exactly the same powering properties. But then, as redstone dust is locational, if I activate this button, you can see the top piston powers, but then if I activate this button, the bottom piston powers instead. This is due to locationality, where you can see that this redstone dust can power this piston or the bottom piston at different locations. Hence the word locationality, because you can see I place these two circuits at different locations and they have different properties. Now, a counter example of this locationality circuit, if we want to just basically have a certain piston to fire, would be to use a repeater instead, because repeaters are non-locational. So for here, even though the repeater, as you know, that's by quasi-connectivity, it will power the bottom piston and obviously the top piston as well. But then if I power this button, you can see that it always have the top piston power. Where you place this circuit doesn't really matter, because it will always be the top piston that powers. You can try it 1,000 times and it will always be the top piston that powers. So yeah. And now we head on to another example. We can see that for this here, I have a node block and a redstone dust, and we have discussed before that node block is an instant updater. So if I power this button here, you see that the left piston extends, but then in this location, we have the right piston extends. So as the right, I mean this here. So you can also say as the back or the front. So this here, the front piston powers, but for this one, the back piston powers. So we can already see that this is a locational circuit, because it behaves differently in different locations. And then another example, because quite frankly, explaining locationality is best with examples, in my belief. So yeah, we have this here. We have these two sticky pistons opposing to each other in terms of its direction. If I power this button, then this piston powers. But if I power this button, then this piston powers. Now this doesn't behave like this exactly in every case. You can have this piston power always or this piston power always. So yeah, but then this by definition itself is already locational, because these two redstone dust can power either of these pistons, and it just so happens that for this button it powers this piston, and this is already locational. So yeah. Now another example. So we have droppers. I haven't really touched on any dropper circuits, but I'll discuss that later. So yeah, anyways, so basically we can always see locationality in terms of the item in the dropper. So if I reset here, so I have this redstone dust that powers these two droppers, and we have the top dropper facing downwards, the bottom one facing upwards. If I power this redstone dust, you can see that the item goes from the bottom dropper to the top dropper. for this location. But then for the other location, if I place it on the top, you can see that when I power this redstone dust, the item goes from the top dropper to the bottom dropper instead. Now, even if I power many times, the item will still remain in the bottom dropper. But for this location, if I power many times, the item will also still remain in the top dropper. This also shows that redstone dust is locational, and the circuit itself is already locational because the items can end up in different positions of the droppers. Now there are two counter examples of this. One is redstone torch, another one is a repeater. For a redstone torch, let's say if I have this item at the top, if I just power this redstone torch, the item goes from the top dropper to the bottom dropper. And even though if I power it the second time, it still remains in the bottom dropper. This is the powering property of redstone torch, by the way. So basically, it powers the bottom dropper first, so the item goes down to up, and then it powers the top dropper, so it goes from the top to down. It is a very counterintuitive thing because normally you would think that they are supposed to power the one that is next to it and then the one adjacent to it, but it isn't for redstone torch. It powers from below to the top. So this is a very interesting property of redstone torches. So there are basically a lot of uses for this here, if I remember how to build it. Yep, this one. So if I place a redstone torch here, you can see that the bottom piston powers and then the side piston power. So the block will always go to here. So this is a very neat property of redstone torch, and it's basically unique. Now another counter example of this locational circuit is this repeater. So if I have this item at the bottom dropper, if I power this, the repeater will send the item from the bottom dropper to the top dropper, and yeah, I powered the second time, it will still remain the top dropper. So the powering order of the repeater is that it first powers the top dropper, so the item goes from top to down, and then it powers the bottom dropper, so the item goes from bottom to top, and hence the item would remain in the top dropper. So yeah. Now you might think that, hey, so this means that redstone dust would be locational, so it will always be locational in any of the cases where it's affected by redstone dust, right? Well, not exactly. There are also some counter examples, even though if I still use redstone dust. And there are two examples basically I will show you. One is this one. So this is a non-locational folded double piston extender. So if I power this, you can see that these pistons fire such that it places the block here, and then if I power it again, it would retract it. Now the locational concern would be this location here, because this redstone dust, quite frankly, powers both this bottom piston and the top piston. And people might think, hey, then the bottom piston might power such that it gives us this thing instead. And then because it's two pulses, so it just gives to this thing. Well, true. It might happen. Actually, no. This here, this goes up, and then yeah, it will actually give us this position if you think that the bottom piston will power. But then that isn't what would happen in any of the locations. Now this is due to raising condition. So I have this piston power, this is trivial, this observer, and then I have this piston power, and after one tick, this observer is a one tick, I power this redstone dust. The piston is moving from this position to this position, and for this specific case, it will always be the top piston that gets fired first in any of the locations. So even though the dust is locational, if I have the correct timing, it wouldn't be locational because of the timing. So the top piston fires at this timing no matter what. This is a racing condition. I will explain it more in the later video. I think it's 2-3, total priority racing conditions and its applications. So yeah, for this timing only. If I were to have this as a 2-tick delay instead, then yes, it would be locational. But since I have a 1-tick, this isn't locational anymore. So yeah, it's a very fancy way. So you can always manipulate some timings to make a supposedly seem to be locational circuit to be non-locational. Another example of manipulating timings is this thing here. So if you are talking about locationality, people might think, hey, we have this as a solid block, so when this piston, because this is basically a double pulse generator when it extends, so when the piston goes to here, then this piston can power again and push it back. But then when we see it, it's not. This bottom piston actually powers even though it's via quasi-connectivity. This is, again, racing condition, because this piston is arriving to this position and then this does powers. So by racing condition, it will always be the front piston that powers. So we would have this here that retracts. And then this is a double pole, single pulse generator. So double pulse on the rising edge and single pulse on the falling edge. So it would do something like this and then just push it back. Because quite frankly, there isn't anything that updates this piston at this location. So it will always be the top piston that powers. But yeah, using racing condition and timings, you can manipulate some piston movements that you want. Now this is going to be very useful because in some bigger piston doors, they all rely on this kind of stuff in order to work. Just to say. And that already concludes locationality. And let's move on to directionality. So directionality refers to circuits that work in specific but not for all directions. And a main cause of directionality is piston conflict. Now again, piston conflict isn't the only thing that will cause directionality. There are also other a bit more complicated things that will also cause directionality. But for the basic level, we only need to consider piston conflicts. So here is an example. So if we power this button, this piston powers instead of this piston. This is already directional actually, because it isn't this piston that powers, it's this piston that powers. It has to select one. So for this button is also this piston. This button would be this piston, and this button would be this piston again. So yeah, another example would be having this setup. So this is again directional, it will always be this piston, and for here it will always be this piston. So yes, now we come into some more complicated circuits because directionality and locationality can be mixed together. This circuit is both locational and directional, and I basically call this a directionally locational circuit. So if I power this button, nothing powers. If I power this button, this 0 ticks. So you can see this is already locational, because for here, none of these pistons power, but for here, one of these pistons power, specifically this one. So yeah, this is already locational. And why is it also directional though? Now that's because how updating works, and quite frankly, this 0-tick generator. And it would be clear if we see another directional circuit, purely directional this time, not locational. So if I power this, then these two pistons power, not the back one. So this is already directional because where you take the output is already determinant. like you cannot take output from here basically using a piston. So yeah, you can only take outputs from these two sides for this direction obviously. So this is facing towards the sea. It's the south direction. Yeah, so it is only this piston and this piston that powers. Now you can already see why these two would be locational, because for a purely directional circuit, it powers both of these pistons. But if you're using a dust, it would be locational, because you can have this power, or both of them powers, or none of them powers. So yeah, this is a very locational circuit indeed. You can have 4 states, literally. So yeah, and then let's move on to this circuit. Now, this is an actual circuit in an observerless store. So this is a tape circuit, and this is from the bottom tape circuit built by Armadillo and Johnny in their 1832 blocks 8x8 seamless observerless piston door. So they have this tape circuit as one of their mechanisms. So if we just power this, you can see that this sticky piston retracts and this normal piston fires. Same for this one actually. But then if I place a block, something different will happen. For this setup, it will have this normal piston pushing the block. But for this setup, it will have nothing. This normal piston never pushes. And you can already see this is directional. Yeah, the reason is just because of this piston torch is powering both of these pistons, and the direction matters because it determines which piston gets to update first. So yeah, that's basically it. And then another common directional circuit with the addition of node blocks is this one. So for this, you can see that this direction, the top piston powers for that, but then for this direction, the bottom piston powers. So this is basically the north-south direction. If I have this here, it will also result in the same thing. This powers. So same for this here. And yeah, you might think, well, then why do we need this? We can just basically power the bottom block instead, literally. Well, it's quite complicated because in some actual cases, you might not be possible to do that. And you must rely on some directional circuits to make something work in order to make it compact. But yeah, usually I would avoid these situations happening. But then on extreme cases, some resonators would rather to have a directional circuit than to enlarge the size of the door's volume. So yeah, this indeed is a directional circuit. So yeah, we don't have to really go into the aspect of compacting here for now. So let's come to another directional circuit again. Now, all of these directional circuits I've mentioned before are actually north-south and east-west directional. But then it doesn't have to be this way. It can also be in other ways. So this is a very good example. This is taken from the directionality testing circuit in CubeMart 6D's 840 block 6x6 seamless observerless funnel trapdoor. Again, observerless. So we have this basically, you can already see the piston conflict. When this redstone block arrives, the game has to determine whether the back piston powers or the front piston powers. So let's test for all 4 directions. You cannot see the drill. For these 2 directions, they don't power the back piston, they instead power the front pistons. But then for this here, they power the back pistons but not the front pistons. So this is already directional. And if we check the direction, this is the south direction and this is the west direction. And as I said before, north-south directional and east-west directional are quite common, but then it can also be northeast directional and southwest directional. It can still happen, basically. Even though the occurrence is quite rare, doesn't mean that it cannot happen. All you need is the right conditions. So yeah. Now After we have seen all of these directional circuits, we might want to think, are there any non-directional circuits that also have piston conflicts, but then they are not directional? Yes, there is. Now, we can recall from 1-2 Properties of Redstone Components 2 that I have showed an example of this already, which is using rails. This is non-locational due to the powering property of rails and the updates of order of observers. So if I power this lever here, you see that the front piston is getting powered. But then if I power this lever here, you can see the back piston that is getting powered. This is caused by the powering property of rails and update order of observers, basically. And there isn't any specific explanation to this, it's just how the game codes things, how the game updates things. So, this is also similar to pushing an array of blocks. So if I have this pushing, so you can see the front piston that powers. If I have this pushing instead, it will have the back piston that powers. No matter in any of the location, how you rotate it, it will always behave the same, basically. So that is one of the non-locational cases. Let's move on to this case. So we have we have this repeater and then this observer. So both of them have a 1 tick of delay, right? So in theory, if they both receive 1 tick of delay, it will be directional. But then no, this repeater always gets to power this piston first. Why? Well, this is due to tau tick priority that I will discuss in 2-3 again. So later you would learn that repeater has a higher powering priority than observers, basically. So it will always be this piston that powers. So this is indeed non-directional. And that already explains everything I need to say about directionality. There isn't a very good way on learning locationality and directionality. It's best to learn from examples. So if the explanation seems a bit confusing, then I'm sorry. You basically just have to experiment more on some circuits to test if they are locational or directional, or neither of them. Now, the reason I'm making this course is because, quite frankly, we do want to avoid every single case of locationality and directionality if possible. And we don't want to accidentally make a locational or directional circuit, because otherwise it will affect the build and makes the build user unfriendly. And being able to identify locational and directional circuits hence becomes very useful. So here I have included exercises for you again. For this time, it's only 3 questions. Now, let me just go through some specific instructions. You might see these circuits. They are in orange. Now, these represent reset circuits because for later courses, the circuits are going to get more and more complicated, basically. So there has to be some reset circuits going on to reset the entire thing. And all you need to do is to read the exercise. It will always have this instruction for resetting paragraph. So all you need to do is to read it, and then you can properly reset it without actually breaking the contraption. Now, I am aware that for some people, I don't know, or actually some computers, whatever, I don't care. If you download my world, you might experience some difficulties, such as not having the exact same property as I discussed it. So for example, if I have this piston here, it powers the top piston and this powers the bottom piston. I have previously heard about some cases where some locational circuits work in some safes but not other safes of the world. I'm not sure if this is true. This is also the reason why I have put some positions here, so that you can always see what I meant exactly. So yeah, For locational circuits, that will be the case, but for directional circuits, then it wouldn't be the case because it will always behave exactly the same. This is how the game codes. So yeah, for locational circuits, if it happens to be locational, then I will put down these positions for you, so that you can always refer to what I'm talking about exactly. So yeah, all of these 3 exercises, by the way, are going to tell you to identify all locational and directional parts of the circuit, if there are any. And then the other parts, for 1.1 and 1.3, it would be to fix all locational and directional issues of the circuits, if any. And another important instruction is do not change the circuit if it originally doesn't contain any locational or directional issues. This would be especially important because of the complexity of 1.3. This entire thing is 1.3. I would go through it later. But yeah, basically, all you need to do is to fix it such that it doesn't even contain any locational or directional circuit cases. So yeah. And once again, the answers are at the back, so you can always tear down this wall, just go to the back to refer to yourself. Now let's get on to this 1.3 because it's quite a bit complicated, but I've already broken it down for simplicity. So actually, 2 of the exercises are from my previous builds, and this one is from a previous build. It's one of my 7x7 full flush seamless and cave door. So I've modified it though, so this isn't exactly the same circuit as you would see in the previous one, in my actual door. So we have this circuit here. Is a bit more complex, but then don't worry. So basically I say that circuit B contains potentially locational or directional circuits shown in circuits C and D. So this is circuit C, and this rotated form like this, which this you can see already represents this here. And then for circuit D, this is a bit different. I would see if I would change this, but circuit D is basically this, which is essentially this circuit here. And they might or might not be locational or directional. And the question basically asks you to identify if circuits C and D are locational or directional. Hence, identify all locational and directional parts of circuit B, if there are any. So yeah, circuits C or D are just helping you for your understanding to see if there are any locational parts of the circuit B. And then, for part B, would be to say that in fact the yellow wall should not be pushed upwards. So this is the yellow wall, this is the yellow wall here. And then under this condition and given the extra obsidian, here is the extra obsidian here. Yeah. Fix all locational and directional issues of circuit B by building the circuit on circuit E, along with rotated version. Now, for all of your fixes, you need to remember that they have to be identical. So this is why I said circuit E and circuit E rotated form must be identical and must return identical positions as circuit B, basically. So yeah, hopefully this doesn't scare you too much. Also, obviously you have to build it in white stained glass, so I didn't include this block here, so don't build it here, basically. So yeah, and also don't change other circuits. This is quite standard already. So yeah, good luck with this exercise. I hope it isn't too hard for you, because I've already broken it down to circuits C and D for your understanding. So yeah, these exercises aim to help you to identify the locational and directional issues, and then train you to provide a solution to fix all of these circuits, all of the locational and directional circuits. So yeah, good luck on the exercises. Yeah, that's all I have to say, I guess. So thank you for watching, and I would see you on 2-2 Half the components and its applications. So yeah, thank you.